Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the James Beard Foundation, thank you for joining us. I'm Anna Magnuson, Manager of Industry Support here at the Foundation. This is the fourth of 5 sessions for our Winter Wellness Series. From the mental to physical, this virtual series aims to combat the various forms of industry burnout and prioritize your well-being. So today, the Southern Smoke Foundation is leading today's workshop. We are joined by Catarina Bill, Chief Mission Officer at Southern Smoke. Kat is responsible for leading the development of programming for the foundation and spearheading the expansion of Behind You, a program offering free mental health counseling to food and beverage workers in multiple states. I'm going to pass it off to Kat in a second, but I'm just for her to introduce our panelists. But I'm just going to quickly run through this webinar format. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our virtual education library on our website, which will be linked in the chat and also at the end of the webinar. We'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end of the session, and you can use the Q&A box throughout as your questions arise. If you're having any tech issues, please put it in the chat and we'll do our best to help you there. And that is everything. I'm going to pass it now to Kat to start our session. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome. And I just want to start off with thanking the James Beard Foundation for inviting us to join today. We're really excited to be part of this dynamic group of people presenting for programming. Thank you to Anna and Ali for all your help to get us coordinated and here today. We're really excited to discuss mental health today. We're going to cover a number of subjects. We're really going to talk about some of the challenges that people are facing from within the industry and really ways to break down those barriers so that everyone can try to introduce more ways to self-care and also seek care. I am joined today by 2 of our university partners from the Behind You program, Dr. Jordan Wright from New York University and Dr. Danielle Baran from Northern Illinois University. I'm going to kick it over to you, Jordan, to say hello and introduce yourself, and then Danielle, and then we'll get started.
Great, thank you, and I'll echo your thank you to the James Beard Foundation for having us, and thank you, as always, to Southern Smoke, because they're awesome, and we'll talk more about how awesome they are, hopefully, over the next hour. So I am Jordan Wright. I am the director of the PhD program in psychology at New York University, and I'm also the director of the NYU Center for Counseling and Community Wellbeing, which is a community-facing, low-fee mental health clinic in the New York area. We serve the broader community. We don't see NYU students typically, but we do serve the broader community at low fee. And we've been partnering with Southern Smoke to offer free services to individuals in the food and beverage industry who have needs and barriers to accessing care. Throw it to you, Danielle.
Hi, I'm Dr. Danielle Baran. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and the director of the Psych Services Center at Northern Illinois University. Similar to Jordan, I run the training clinic at Northern Illinois University, where we see a wide range of clients. We see them both from the university and from the wider Northern Illinois region. And with the inclusion of telehealth, we've actually been able to expand services really throughout the entire state of Illinois. We see clients with a wide range of issues, problems with daily living, anxiety, depression, and we also have a trauma services clinic where we see clients and provide care for people suffering from PTSD. We do all this at no or low cost to clients, and we have a real mission of providing high quality care to people who can't easily access services in any other way. So for us, partnering with Southern Smoke was a real natural fit. Because they're an amazing organization, and we've been partnering with them for about 18 months now, and we've graduated many clients from the program, and our graduate student staff who work with the clients directly have really enjoyed their time working with people in the food and beverage industry.
Thank you again, both of you, for being here today, for being such great partners. So before we dive into things just going to tell everyone a little bit more about Southern Smoke and our Behind You program. So Southern Smoke Foundation, for those of you who don't know, we are a nationwide nonprofit. We provide emergency relief grants and no-cost mental health services to people within the food and beverage industry. So all of you hard workers out there who are definitely feeling it right now between Mardi Gras and Super Bowl and Lunar New Year and Valentine's Day, we're really here for you. We're here to support you in all the ways that we can, specifically, again, with crisis relief in the form of financial grants and creating opportunities for mental health services. So that is who we are. Again, we're really happy to be here today. And given that it's a really busy time in the industry, let's kick off and start talking about some ways that we can help you all to deal with what's going on. We talk about some of the challenges, right? We say there's, lack of sleep, lack of social support. It's tough being in the industry. So can we talk a little bit more about how we can try to address those barriers? Maybe some tips and things that are available within resources and just those day-to-day little moments that you can take. Jordan?
Start. I'll start. Yeah, there are so many barriers. One of the interesting things when working with this population, we are constantly learning. We're constantly learning what are the typical barriers, what are the typical things that not everybody realizes about people who work in the food and beverage industry that are getting in the way of their own wellness, their own well-being. And I want to highlight a couple of them. Kat very astutely points out, like, sleep is a big one. Obviously working in the food and beverage industry tends not to be a 9-to-5 job, right? That wouldn't make much sense in the food and beverage industry. So they're often on a very different schedule. But a couple of the other things that we've noticed as huge impactors on the mental well-being of the people who work in this space, one of them we've identified as this intolerance for mistakes. I often think about the idea that in my job, I'm working with some of the same people. I get to repair mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. And if I make a mistake, it's not always the biggest deal in the world, and we fix it and we do better the next time. But if I'm at a restaurant, I don't want that wait staff to make the mistake on me, right? It's my only dinner. I don't have tolerance for the chef making a mistake with my meal. And so there's this intolerance for imperfection that weighs very heavily. It adds a lot of stress to this particular population. The other one that I want to highlight, yeah, that's Waffle, by the way. Waffle joins me in all of my teaching, and she's my mascot. She knows how to do this. She's just going to chill back there. So the other one that I think we've identified, and my clinicians, my graduate student clinicians have really identified, is that too few people, especially those who are not in the industry, understand what people in the industry really go through. What we're hearing, and I'm glad Danielle brought up this sort of trauma-informed work, what we're hearing is that people in this industry witness a lot. There is a culture around just pushing through and letting things go, but they see a lot of bad behavior on the part of patrons. If you're working in a bar at the end of the night, you see a lot of bad stuff happen. And we, the psychologists of the world, are trained in how to deal with witnessing trauma and witnessing bad behavior and dealing with it emotionally. But people in the food and beverage industry typically are not trained to deal with witnessing some really bad stuff happening. And so some of the barriers to their mental well-being is not having anyone to talk to about it, not having anyone who truly understands, not having really good friends who are on their same schedule that they can confide in, not having sort of the mental health services, or not knowing exactly where to go for the mental health services, which is one of the reasons I'm extra grateful for the Behind You program, for the Southern Smoke programs, because it provides a space to say, you know what, you need support too. You need someone who can understand you, listen to you, help you get some of the skills to deal with the stresses of being in this industry, the imprecarity of the job, right? Not knowing if you're just going to get fired on a whim, or if you do make that mistake, like there's a lot fewer protections than in many other industries. So these are some of the barriers that we've identified. I've talked enough. I'll throw it to you, Danielle.
Yeah, I think those are great. I love those. And those are some of the same things we're seeing. So it's not unique to New York. I think this is across the whole industry. I think a couple of the other things that I've noticed in the stories of the clientele we're working with is that that there's challenges with days off and flexibility. And while some of it's not unique to food and beverage, meaning that when someone takes a day off, they have to find someone to cover their shift when they unexpectedly need a day off. But sometimes the impact of that is really felt very deeply. So we have people sometimes that it's their 11th day in a row working, or they've only worked 4 days in a row, but they've been short-staffed every single shift. And that system then where they can thrive when things are kind of naturally balanced is kind of falling apart when you're meeting the needs of everyone and there's more pressure on a system to perform with fewer people doing it. And so that's one area where we see a lot of challenges with just meeting the demands of the job. And as everyone knows, food and beverage have been short-staffed in general for a very long time. And I think a lot of people are coming in feeling that pressure. The other thing is just the natural ebbs and flows of the industry, meaning that after the holidays, there is a little bit of a dip in people going out to eat. Sometimes during that time, people in food and beverage still have to make ends meet. So they end up picking up gig work, which means then they're balancing sometimes 2 jobs, maybe 3 during those periods. But then that gig work tends to continue after that. So we've seen a lot of people who are piecing together multiple jobs, and that's creating even more challenges with mental health because their days off from their primary job are getting really filled with other gigs that they're picking up during that period, just to cover it because they got cut from shifts or shifts are shorter. And so these challenges create additional stress and additional lack of sleep because they're trying to fit all the things into the white space of their schedule.
You both raised great points. And oh, Jordan, did you want to kind of jump in?
No, I was going to jump in because I had I had thoughts, but I always have thoughts.
Hey, y'all are the experts. I'm just here to smile and help.
Yeah, no, I appreciate what you just said because typically when I see a client, when my students see a client who is not sleeping well, we have a really clear intervention. We have clear skills. That's called sleep hygiene. We, give them a prescription of the sleep habits and, tell them about what to do in bed and what not to do in bed and what to do in their bedroom and not to do in their bedroom and these sorts of things. And this kind of work, frankly, just does not work with this population. We cannot have that predictability of we know every single night you're going to be home at 2:30 in the morning and you're going to have until 8:30 in the morning to sleep. And we don't have the same tools with this population that we can use with pretty much everybody else when they're not sleeping enough, when they're not taking care physically of their bodies well enough. And we know sleep and sleep hygiene affects everything else. It shortens your fuse, and we're not allowed to short fuse in the food and beverage industry, right? We're not allowed to snap. At customers, at our supervisors, at our colleagues, we can't do that. It shortens our fuse. It makes us more susceptible to the pressure. We are worse at stress management when we are not sleeping adequately, when we're not getting enough hours to recharge ourselves. I can't sort of overstate just how important this sleep issue is in taking care of yourself in this industry. And there are no great answers to it. We can give some tools to do a little bit better. We can make sure that you're not engaging in some of those behaviors that are actually counterintuitive to our sleep or contraindicated for getting good sleep. We know that there's a culture of, at least in New York, we hear this a lot, the culture of taking shots at the end of your shift. happens a lot. And that actually, it kind of feels to us like, oh, alcohol, is kind of a depressant. It makes us sleep and that kind of stuff. But actually, it's pretty bad for your sleep to take those shots right before you leave and go home and try to sleep. And there are things like that we can make recommendations around, but they come at a cost, right? So will you be seen by your supervisor or your peers as not a team player because you're not engaging in this ritual that we're all engaging in? Are we not part of the family anymore? Are we not in it all the way because you're trying to step out? There are costs to not engaging in some of these behaviors that are ultimately going to harm your well-being in the long run.
With that in mind, what are some tools and recommendations you might have, or some of those phrases you can use that aren't exactly excuses, but kind of help explain that you're maybe going to go one direction versus the other, or how to take those few moments, the best way to navigate these situations?
Yeah, I think that the best thing to do is have a plan. You never want to be caught off guard with some of these things, like when you don't want to go out after work and the culture is to take those shots at the end of your shift or to go to the bar down the street. And so having a plan, maybe you're going to go out one night, but you're not going to go out every night. Developing some kind of plan so that you can be upfront with the people that you're going to go out and hang out with, so that you're not seen as not a team player. Like Jordan said, it comes at a cost. But I think in general, most food and beverage places have a culture where they want to respect those boundaries too. So just saying, hey, I need to get up early in the morning. I need to do something. I joined this new gym, something like that, to build it in where the expectation is, I'm gonna try to reduce this going out every night. So it doesn't, there isn't the assumption made. And then you're put on the spot at the end of the night where you have to come up with something that sounds not genuine, and you feel like you're lying, quite frankly.
Yeah, the plan is so important. I would just add two things to that. One is when you're coming up with that plan, it really needs to be aligned with your values, right? You need to make that plan deliberately. It can't just be like, I'm not going to do that anymore, and then you get sucked in at the last minute because your willpower isn't there. It's not really aligned with what you truly want. And that's one of the things we work on a lot in counseling with this population, is figuring out where their values really lie and are your behaviors aligned with those values. The other thing that I recommend to all of these clients who are trying to set up some of these boundaries for themselves, with their colleagues, with their managers, with other things, is, I think, similar to what Danielle was saying, is to enlist some support, right? If you frame it as, I need you to get my back, your colleagues are going to get your back. If you frame it as, I need some help here because I'm going to want to go out tonight and I'm going to want to hang out and party with you, but I really need to not do that. Can you have my back at the end of the night? Can you enlist two of your colleagues, your friends, your peers, your companions? Can you enlist them to support you in that decision so that you don't feel like you're betraying everybody, so you're like, oh, they've got my back, I will have their back when they need me to do something similar. That actually is a way to set up a boundary while deepening your relationship with your peers and your colleagues, rather than feeling that you're pushing them away.
Great suggestions. And thank you for the explanations as well, because I think it's really helpful for everyone to hear what you're hearing and what you're seeing. It certainly makes us all feel like we're not as alone with those emotions and the things that are affecting us. So with that in mind, I know we've talked a lot about kind of the culture from within your work group. What about the outward facing experiences that people have when they walk into that bar or restaurant or coffee shop every day? The masking of everything's great, I have a smile on my face, but I am actually really struggling. I'd like to talk about that from a personal perspective. How do people deal with some of those moments? And then also, how do you discuss that with your employer in a way that's not, again, as you said, Jordan, there's no room for protection, right? You feel worried to share what you're going through because it might affect your job. So if we can kind of touch on those two things.
I'll go first. There is always a cost to inauthenticity. And Danielle and I probably know it better than most, right? As therapists, as psychologists, we can't go in mopey every day. We can't show our clients just how much we're struggling. And all of us know over the past few years, during the pandemic, during everything that's happening in our culture, a lot of us are struggling in many, many different ways. And we have to like appear to be rocks, just like people in the food and beverage industry have to go and put on that happy face. They have to put on that smile. And that comes at a cost. It absolutely does. It is not easy to do. People in this industry become masters at masking. They become absolute experts at hiding their true authentic self. And sometimes that bleeds into their real life, not just their work life. It bleeds into everything. They think that they're only going to be valued if they have a smile on. They think they're only going to be valued if they are complete rocks and stoic. And there's not going to be a way to fix that, right? We're not going to create a new industry where it's okay for a waitress to tell me how much she's struggling when I'm ordering my food. It's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. So the two things that I think are most important, one is that everybody needs an outlet outside of work. Everybody needs to find that person, that therapist, that friend, that confidant, where they can show just how imperfect they are. They can be vulnerable and say, I am struggling. I need help. I need support. I think that's one thing that we all need to find in our lives. The other thing, and this is specifically for employers and managers, is they need to have some tolerance for when their staff come to them and unload a little bit and just sort of dump some of their problems on them. And they need to be okay with that and not say, get back to work, I don't care about this, right? That's not the best manager's responsibility in that moment. The best manager in that moment is going to be a little bit of a sponge and let them show some of their vulnerable, authentic selves so that they can then plaster on that smile, turn around, leave the office and go serve or go cook or go whatever they're doing. It is a skill that managers need to gain and too few managers have. We'll talk probably a little bit later about when the manager realizes, oh, you need a little bit more than I can provide, right? That flip to say, oh, you need to talk to a professional who can really support you in this, help you get better skills. But for a lot of food and beverage workers, they just need a place to vent sometimes. And managers are a great place to vent. No, because they can not only sponge it up, but they can also show these the food and beverage workers that they're not going to get fired if they show that vulnerability to the manager. Like, I, as a manager, I'm okay with this. Come talk to me, and then go out and do your job.
I love that idea of like taking it to the manager and like letting that person be the person who's the person that everyone can go to and absorbs it for everyone. So I just want to like frame this a little bit, what we've noticed in the stories of these people that kind of self-select in, particularly to restaurants where they feel this masking effect, but I'm sure it's in other parts of the industry as well, is that people who self-select into restaurants, whether it's the front of the house or back of the house, tend to really talk about the energy of a restaurant, not quite as a calling, but pretty close. They really talk about loving when things go well in a restaurant. They talk about the energy, the fact that there's some consistency, but everything's ever changing. They talk about loving the fast pace of it. They really talk about what originally got them into doing this job. I think it's those people that self-select into these roles, whether they're serving and interacting with patrons, or they're in the back of the house and they're cooking, and their, precision and talent for putting together these dishes, they're really talking about all the things coming together. And you see the wash over their face about how positive things are when it's going really well. The thing is that when you're having an off day, or when you're struggling outside of work, and you enter that environment, it no longer feels exciting. It no longer feels high energy, and you no longer feel that enthusiasm and that harmony that comes from that. And or maybe it's just your 11th day in a row, and you're just having an off day. So a lot of times, what we do in therapy is we remind people that their best looks different every day, and that that there are days where they're high energy, they're putting in a lot of that effort, they have that, they're quick, they do everything at kind of peak performance. And then maybe there are days where their energy is just a little bit lower because they're dealing with something and they are masking a little bit, they feel less authentic, but it's different, it's not less than. Maybe their connections with customers are actually a little bit more authentic in those moments. Maybe they're not as put on, just a smile plastered over your face. And that best is different. It's not qualitatively worse than. And so we open up a little place for just that self-compassion, that idea that your best is going to look different over time. And that doesn't stop you from being a damn good server or a great sous chef. That's even if you weren't as quick. And I think that's important. And then I think also just recognizing that in those moments where you feel like you're masking a whole lot, and it's taking everything to get through the shift itself, really, in addition to going to the manager, which I think is a great, recommendation, it's taking out, stepping away, getting someone to cover your tables, getting someone to cover your station, taking 5 minutes, popping in your earbuds, and go listening to that song. Just something that is going to help you get a little bit more mental space to get out of your head a little bit, go into the bathroom, wash your hands, feel the water go over your hands, anything to kind of get you out of that mental space that you're in and increase your tolerance for handling the stress in those moments, and really honing that for each individual person.
It's such a great point. I want to say two things. One is about the self-selection. I shared this with Kat long ago, but my first job in New York City, I was an assistant manager at a restaurant. And it worked so well with my brain because I am so ADHD. I need stimulation. I need the constant change and the differences and meeting different people. And I am not extroverted at all. I need my alone time, but I am scattered. And so the variety really played to my strengths when it played to my strengths. And your point is so important, that there were moments where I was like, this is just not for me. I'm not in a good place. I just messed something up and now I'm beating myself up about it. Like, there is a type of person who ends up in this industry. And it is not just based on skill, right? There are so many people who are brilliantly skilled in cooking, in baking, in serving, or whatever, that don't end up in this industry. You have to be skilled and a good personality match for this. And so we see a lot of this ADHD fieriness. I think I see a lot of myself in many of the clients that we're talking to. The other point that I think you made that's really an excellent one is individualizing and finding what works for you for those 5 minutes. So there's a practice in psychotherapy that's very, very popular and very sexy now called mindfulness. And some people will see it as a cure-all, and everybody, if you're more mindful. I'm terrible at it. My brain just doesn't work that way. I still teach it to some clients to see if it works. Other clients I try deep breathing with. Others, we find that song, right? We find that that artist that will really calm them down for those 5 minutes. And sometimes they don't even have the 5 minutes. Sometimes they have to deal with 2. Like they can take a 2-minute break, and finding individually what works for you just to lower your heart rate. That's what we're really trying to do here, is whatever you can do to lower your heart rate in those 2 to 5 minutes, find it, practice it, get better at it, get quicker at it, and use it. Use it liberally. Try and do it every single day if you can do it, even if it's an off day, right? If you're at home and you don't have a shift that day, make sure to practice it that day. We want to build that muscle so that it's quicker and easier for us to slow that heart rate in that moment.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. That's actually, we start with mindfulness with almost all of our food and beverage clients. And we have them practice mindfulness. We don't say it's a panacea. It's not going to fix every, ill that you're facing at work. But the more you practice it, the more you also become in tune with, oh, I need to take those 2 minutes now. Like, as opposed to waiting until it gets really bad or really overwhelming to where I might feel like I'm going to snap, or I'm just barely holding it together. And then we also do teach a lot of distress tolerance skills as well, just to increase that. And distress tolerance is another kind of psychological term, which just means your ability to handle higher amounts of stress in the environment at any one time. And the more you practice it over and over, the more automatic it becomes, so that you don't have to think about it. You just automatically start doing it. And we found that the people that do practice it tend to report higher levels of satisfaction when they're on the job in those stressful environments.
Can I add? We are talking a lot about individuals and what they can do in the moment to tolerate the stress and tolerate whatever they're doing. This is going to be a little bit of a downer, and I apologize, because 2 of the other themes that we see happen are just not going to be fixed by mindfulness or deep breathing. And one is rampant sexism in the food and beverage industry. We work with a lot of female bartenders, female sous chefs, who just get treated differently, and there's no amount of mindfulness or distress tolerance that's going to fix that. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of, we're in a major city here, is that bars and restaurants are a place where predators thrive. They hide, they thrive. There are drinks roofied. There are things that happen in restaurants, in bars, that there's no amount of work I can do with an individual server or bartender that's going to fix that. And so one of the things that we do a lot of in the counseling work is identifying that, understanding it, labeling it, and deciding if it's worth it. And for many of our food and beverage workers, where they currently are, even if it's not the safest environment, is totally worth it. There's enough good there. They have enough satisfaction where it's absolutely worth it. There have been a couple where we have worked with them to be like, I'm a good server. This is not a good restaurant for me. I am going to start looking for maybe a slightly healthier environment, a slightly healthier and safer place for me to bring my skills than where I currently am.
Thank you so much for bringing that topic up, and both of you for just addressing so many different areas that I think a lot of people struggle with again. And we can smile and talk about all the great things and tools that we can offer, but not without talking about the causes and the roots. So I think, we really appreciate that you all are hearing it, and you're hearing it nationwide. This program itself is in 5 states right now. We're growing. So what we love to do is hear more and more about what kind of those common threads are, because the industry at large does suffer with certain things. And the fact that you all are hearing them and helping us to work through them, it's incredibly helpful and very impactful. So thank y'all again. I think right now, talking about some of the harder issues, one thing that we all hear, I know us, when we receive feedback from the clients that we're sending over to you all, anxiety. Anxiety is huge in what people are dealing with both at work and at home. So can we talk a little bit about, we talked about some of the causes and the stressors, anxiety, and also that feeling of dealing with anxiety alone, right? There's this big thing, it's pretty common in the industry, and anyone who's watched The Bear, screaming and going to the cooler and screaming and crying in the cooler. Here, our biggest goal is to help eliminate that. We don't want anyone to have to go and cry in the cooler, and it certainly shouldn't be a rite of passage, but it is. So can we talk a little bit more about that loneliness, that isolation? All of it circles back to anxiety. How can we deal with it? What should we do? And then I would like to go back to Jordan, what you talked about with, we can't just put it all on the poor managers. So how do we do this? Let's open up that part of the conversation also. Danielle, would you like to start?
Sure. I think it's so important to talk about like this lack of social support, because it does seem like the culture among food and beverage workers is not only do you spend time at work, you have that shot at the end where you go down to the bar, go down to the end of the block to another bar, to another establishment, or you go out on your days off to another, to a restaurant or a bar. So not only are you surrounded by it when you're on, but you go there for your own enjoyment. And so the whole environment tends to be surrounded by food and beverage, which can actually make people feel quite isolated. There's a desire to be connected to others, but they end up feeling very isolated in general. And so I will just say, like, I don't have any quick fixes for screaming in the cooler. I actually don't think screaming in the cooler is that bad. It's actually a great skill. And like you said, rite of passage. And so I don't, while it's maybe not the most optimal way of handling stress, it is a way of handling stress. And I don't want to shame anyone for having that experience. Because it can be very cathartic to yell it out. And so I think people do feel incredibly isolated. And so I think Jordan raised the point earlier of trying to find that one person. Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe it's a person outside of the mental, or not the mental health, the food and beverage sphere. Maybe it is a mental health worker. And finding that one person who can hear you, who truly listens. We tend to think in monologues. And when we're anxious, we tend to monologue even more. And so having someone listen to our monologue and be just a listener can be really helpful. Research has shown that even short amounts of time of just having someone listen to you when you're talking reduces stress, reduces our physiological arousal. And so I think there's some benefit to having that experience of, I'm here, someone hears me, someone that understands. And so it doesn't maybe cure everything for the isolation that is feeling, but those short amounts of time, those kind of micro coping skills can be really helpful.
I'll add, I think of these as two separate issues, but very related, the loneliness and the anxiety. And something I think that it's really important to understand is that stress and anxiety are not the same thing. This is a stressful industry. It just is. And people going into it need to know that. People who have been in it know it very well. It is a stressful industry. I'll get really nerdy. There's something called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which is, it's just an inverse, it's an upside down U. And the idea is that we actually need some stress. We need some physiological arousal to perform at all, right? If our food and beverage industry workers had zero stress at all, like, would I ever get my food? Maybe not. They're just chilling back there. Like, they need some urgency. They need some stress, but there's a point where it's too much and it starts getting in the way and we start performing worse and we start internalizing and becoming anxious. And the anxiety is different than the stress. The stress is needing to get this food out immediately. The anxiety, like Danielle was talking about, is that internal monologue, like, oh, I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to mess this up. And that internal monologue, is where actually we can help a lot. Yes, finding that one person to talk to reduces that, because you automatically break up that monologue. Our monologues tend to snowball. So that little bit of anxiety, if I'm left to my own devices, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But if having somebody else stop that monologue and say, oh, did you, that sucks. Even that, like, oh, that sucks, can actually reduce the anxiety. And research has shown that over and over. If it's too big, right? If that anxiety monologue is just too big for a listener to help with, that's when a mental health professional is necessary. That's what we do. That's what we have trained for. We are good at getting in on that monologue, and helping out. The loneliness, which of course feeds the anxiety, and the anxiety feeds the loneliness, is a different issue. And I know we've said it now probably 3 times, but finding those people who, one, can understand what you're going through. If your best friend from high school is still a best friend, but has no idea what it's like to work in the food and beverage industry, they may not be the best confidant around what you're going through. Or they may just be that empathic and understanding that they really get you and they really understand. And that's great. But many times they're not. The other side of it, though, is finding besties from within the industry. Finding besties that you're working with is not always ideal either. There is an inherent competitiveness within the industry there that is just baked in. There is that scrutiny. And so them going through exactly what you're going through may be helpful if you really, really connect well, or they may be a little ADHD like me and a little all over the place and not a reliable confidant. They may not be the best person to help you manage and get through. So this idea of loneliness in the industry is a tough one to crack. It really is. There's no perfect answer for everybody. Each individual person needs to find out, how can I build the best support network for me? And that support network may look very different than this server next to me and their support network that works for them.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback a little bit off of that, because I like the uniqueness, because I do think it's different for every person. In fact, some of the people that we've worked with that feel the most lonely are those that actually have families at home, that are partnered and have families, because they're the ones that aren't maybe going out after work. They're the ones rushing home to do family obligations, and yet they're on a completely different schedule than their family. And so they feel isolated both from colleagues and feel isolated somewhat from their families as well. And some of that loneliness that they feel in both spheres is even harder for those individuals. And we have to really develop ways of thinking about their environment. What can they do? Who can they turn to that's unique to them?
And the lesson can't be don't have a family.
Right. Right.
Don't take that lesson away from this. Right?
Well, and I think that some people feel a pressure that you have to leave the industry when you do have a family, right? Or that the industry isn't built for families, or there are only certain jobs within the industry, like prep cook, that has can work during the day. Things like that.
It's so interesting to hear you all and what you're hearing and you're seeing. Again, I'm taking notes myself, because I think everything that you all are addressing has been so helpful. But it's interesting to know that all of this exists, but to hear it from you all, because you're hearing it from us, and it's just it's really impactful. I know that we're kind of we're getting close to time, and one thing that I think everyone would like to hear a little bit more about warning signs and how to ask for help, right? What should I be on the lookout for if I am that manager or that coworker, accountability buddy, but also what should I be checking in with myself, and what are the right, or what are some suggested tools or steps to take?
Yeah, this is tough because managers are not trained mental health professionals. They're not great at necessarily identifying all of the signs. I have two thoughts, and Danielle, you'll probably have way more than I do. My first thought is look out for any change in, like, dramatic changes in functioning or behavior or hygiene or anything that looks dramatically different. That's always kind of a warning sign, and it's not always for the worse. Look for like dramatic improvement in performance. That we know that, for example, we're seeing a lot of substance use in the food and beverage industry as well. And we have seen some of our clients really dramatically improve their performance on the job with cocaine, with other, ways of enhancing. So any sort of dramatic change in behavior, in performance, in anything that you notice, in the way they look, any of that could be a warning sign. Not everyone is, right? Not everything is a warning sign. But I would rather jump on a warning sign accidentally and it me be wrong than miss it. My other suggestion and thought, though, and this is more of a culture shift in the industry, is for managers to do a little bit of training in this area, in mental health awareness, in how to check in with their staff. Yes, they have to deal with the calendar. Yes, they have to deal with payroll. Yes, they have all of these other competing responsibilities. But because there are not, it's not like they're kids in school where we have teachers who are kind of trained to do this. We don't have eyes on our food and beverage workers except for the managers, right? We don't have consistent eyes on. So training them to ask and do check-ins, to do little wellness checks, a 5-minute wellness check once every other week with each staff member can catch a lot. You're not going to catch everything, and it's never going to be perfect, but it is a little bit of a shift in thinking about what a manager can do for the larger staff within a restaurant or bar.
I like those a lot. And I think I imagine if there are some managers on this call, they're thinking, well, how do I fit that in? And I think the how are you, like how are you doing, can be a good jumping off point. But I agree, getting training in that area of what are the red lines that maybe I can no longer help. Because that how are you, your employees might be masking during that part, because there is an evaluative component between the manager and the employee relationship too. So it's always tricky. I would say additional things. I think the ones that Jordan came up with are really great. The additional things that I would look for is an employee that has a hard time calming down. If there's someone, and this kind of speaks to that larger change, but if there's someone who is having a hard time kind of returning to their own individual baseline, once they get upset about something, that's usually an indicator that something's going on, that they're either bringing in something from outside to work or they're having some challenge. And for individual employees, things that you should be looking out for are feeling always on edge, or even when there's no identified trigger for why you're on edge. If you're just always feeling on edge, feelings of overwhelm that don't go away when you've used everything in your toolbox to make them go away. Any thoughts at all of ending your own life or ending the life of someone else. Those are kind of that one's bright red, but these are all the red flags that indicate that maybe it is time. And just, I'll put it out there, if there's anyone who has thought, maybe I should seek therapy and they've never been to therapy, that thought alone indicates that maybe you should go to therapy.
Yeah, I wanna italicize or underline a point you made. I think the definitely all of those are red flags for yourself, and really thinking about the one I want to underscore the most is the out of proportionness. When your reactions, when you take a step back, or you're thinking back to how you blew up the other night or anything like that, if you think it's out of proportion to what the situation really called for, that should be your internal flag to say, I need some support. I overreacted to that. I couldn't calm down easily enough. I ramped this up unnecessarily. Anything that you look back on and think, or even in the moment, some of us are really good at in the moment knowing I'm being a little irrational right now, but it's hard to calm yourself down. Those are the moments to reach out for some help.
So good. Thank you all. I just, like I said, I've been taking my own notes, I think. And I think that people should really believe it when someone asks. One thing that our co-founder always said, you good? And he really means it. So if one of your managers is asking, if one of your team members is asking, believe it. Believe that they're being authentic, and maybe you don't have to divulge everything, but you can use that even as your own gut check. Because I think sometimes when I hear that, even when he's roaming around the office, I'm like, am I good? You know, like so I love everything that you all have said. And I hope that, you know, everyone really takes it to heart, because we know that you all are the experts and you're really putting research behind the tools that you're trying to create for us as an industry. I think I'm checking to see if we have any questions.
It looks like we do in the Q&A.
Let's see. Sorry, maybe.
This is a good question.
Do you want to take it, Jordan?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I'll read it out. I don't know if everyone can see it. As an owner, how can we be the listening ear for an employee while maintaining the boundaries? I struggle with this without being too soft on employees who sometimes take advantage of my leniency. It's a great question, and it's always a question of professionalism, right? Where are our professional boundaries? And we are taught, and we learn early on in most of our industries, that we have to be professional. We have to have these boundaries. We've got to, it's more about like, this is work, and you deal with work stuff at work and not human stuff at work. I'm a big believer in erring on the more lenient side. Always. I would rather be a human. I'm a manager. I oversee a lot of employees, and I would much rather be human. It's why I don't mind having waffle in my webinars or in my meetings or anything like that. I want them to know I'm human. And yes, I will get taken advantage of sometimes. That's okay. I don't mind that. I have decided where my line is. You have to decide where your line is, where you are willing to give a bit and say, I know you're going through a tough time. Take the next few days off, or, let's reassign your shifts and I'll help you with that. And that may be your line. Others may be like, no, I can't really help you with that. I don't have the bandwidth to rearrange the schedule. I don't have enough employees to deal with it. And that may be your line. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong and I know we're talking a lot about managers being the sponges and owners being the helpers, but you're stressed too, right? You need to look after yourself, and creating and being very explicit about your own boundaries, and knowing when you're out of your depth and being like, I hear you're having a lot of trouble. Let me hook you up with a therapist. Let's find you some services rather than me having to deal with this, is really important. So defining it for yourself, being explicit with yourself about where your boundaries are and what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, will help you not just get caught off guard and be like, oh, okay, I'll just do it.
That's great.
I love that. And in the interest of time, I will just say, like, I echo everything Jordan says. My motto, and all my students know it, is like, be a human first. and there's always room for the professional part, but there's a part to just lean in and be a human. And I think when you're worried about it being too lenient, I think that's the point at wondering at what point is this something that I can no longer handle, and really turning it over to a mental health professional or FMLA or some of the things in your own toolbox.
I think that's a great segue as a follow-up from another manager owner, just again, to be mindful of time. You know, as a manager owner that has been for a while, checking in with staff members, lending ear to the staff. What are some recommendations, suggestions you have for managers to cope?
I think there's several of the same ones we've talked about here. I think the challenge with being a manager is that you may not have that lateral person. And so you may actually have more isolation that you feel because you may not have a person who can be your work bestie, because there are natural boundaries that are kind of created. And so what I would do is find that another person in the industry potentially, to not within your you know, as an owner, but maybe you've connected with other owners, other managers, that you can really be a person to support, and they can support you. I know that's easier said than done. Like, with what time is probably the second question, because managers, owners are doing everything. And so what I would say is you can always reach out to a mental health professional to get the support. But I think that there's also, you know, I think that finding ways of getting managers together to talk about the challenges they're facing at work can be really helpful for everyone.
I'm just gonna add my hot take. All owners and all managers should be in counseling. Like, you should all have the supports that someone that's trained like we are can offer and provide. It's too much to ask you to just be a sponge and deal with all of that issue and trauma and all that stuff and just hold it in. I agree. I think it'd be fantastic if there were like owner meetups or like group therapy for restaurant owners and bar owners and that kind of stuff. I think that would be fantastic.
I'm seeing some idea flags over here, y'all. So another question, what should I do to get the most out of therapy?
Ooh, that's a loaded big question, because there are good therapists out there, there are bad therapists out there. There's a continuum. My suggestion to all clients to get the most out of therapy is to try and be as transparent and vulnerable as possible and commit to it. So if your therapist gives you a little homework to do the homework. If your therapist asks, how you doing? Doing good. Make sure you are as open and honest as you can be with your therapist. That engagement in therapy will go a long way toward you actually benefiting from it.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think all of those things are necessary, like part of the ingredients, part of the sauce. And then I think having a clear goal, it doesn't have to be like in 6 months, I will, but it has to be a sense of like how your life would be improved in 6 months if we knew therapy was working. Like, what would you want us to be different about your life? Just having a sense, we notice that those are the people that tend to do the best in therapy when they know they're working for something.
Right. And Emily, I think we might run out of time. We can certainly follow up. Emily asked, how would we nudge an employee to take advantage of the tools available? I don't know if we'll get cut off. We're really clicking on the clock here. So if we don't, Emily will make sure that question gets answered over email, and all of our information is going to be available to you so that you can find us. We'd be happy to answer those questions. And again, we're so grateful for you all for participating today. We're definitely going to put some materials together as well.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we were able to get to some questions. Definitely a lot of information, but we covered a lot. And I'm glad that we got a lot of just useful tips and takeaways for folks today. Let's just bring back up Wright, where you can find more. And I want to remind everyone that this recording will also be up on our virtual education library in the next day or so. That's linked in the chat, and also some of our other resources, and their links are here. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you, everybody.